Welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker and Reverend Alexander in reference to abolishing slavery in the penal system in the state of Tennessee. And of course, Pastor Walker, let's see if we can start off with you by having you to give us some information in reference to how this money flows, and I mean where it starts, and because I think very, very few people understand exactly how this operates. We know that they're working there, but
well, first of all, Dr. Haney, you got to realize that technically slavery has not been abolished in the United States of America, because if there's an exception, that means it's still in existence. So slavery is still alive and well in the prison systems, and the incentive is people are making money. You know, you got private prison systems, companies, CCA, Correction Corporation of America, you know, that's funneling people, that are handling people that are being funneled into the prison system. You know, you go from being traded on the auction block to being traded on the NASDAQ now, and all these shareholders stand to benefit. You know, you have to ask yourself a question: who are the shareholders? You know, are the shareholders some of our attorneys or our lawyers or our prosecutors or judges or the like? You know, are some of the shareholders our legislatures, you know, in the Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate? You know, I would venture to say yes. You know, people that go out and get a 401k and they putting money into that thing like that, and then you got people out there investing your money into CCA of America, and here you are, a shareholder in the prison system, and you know you getting dividends from people being enslaved basically in the prison system
and managing your money.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
You.
Yeah. So you know, it's a serious issue that needs to be looked at, and needs to be looked at intensely, because it needs to be abolished. It needs to be truly abolished, because then if you do that, then you will start to slowly see the dwindling away of the private prisons. You start because there will be no longer any real incentive for them to continue to build these private prison systems, because you know there would be no slavery. You know, that net will be gone from them. So and then it would also diminish the school to prison pipeline. You know, all these things are set up by design. You know, you've got stories where you got judges that have been tried and convicted for selling people into the prison system because there were shareholders in these private prison companies and stuff like that. And it was to their advantage to sentence somebody to these long sentences. Then you got to think about when these people are passing these bills for, you know, extended sentences for certain things and all this stuff like that. What's really behind that? What's the driving force? Is it because crime is running so rampant, or is it because there's an economical advantage to doing something like that? I would venture to say it's economics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is economics. And I think that there's a point that's really important to make here, and that is, so this bill that we talked about that's live in the session, the sponsor for this bill in the House is Representative Joe Towns out of Memphis, who's just a tremendous asset, I think, to our General Assembly. And this is a great bill that he's sponsoring. And one objection may be, well, wait a minute, if we amend this in the Tennessee Constitution, does that mean we close all the prisons and everybody just leaves? No, because Article 1, Section 32 of the Tennessee Constitution allows for the creation and maintenance of safe and humane prisons in the state of Tennessee. Now, what I would argue, and I'm sure Pastor Walker would argue, is that they are neither safe nor humane, but what this does mean is that if Representative Towns' bill passes, prisoners will still be prisoners, but by God, they won't be slaves. You know, and I think from a faith perspective and from a political perspective, regardless of what side of the aisle someone sits on, slavery is simply indefensible in this state.
And
in any state
what
in the
about,
country.
Is there some kind of mass movement that is underway in reference to trying to deal with this as a problem? And I think you mentioned the fact that some states compensate prisoners and some states don't, and et cetera. Is there any kind of movement that will attempt to abolish not only slavery in Tennessee, but abolish slavery in the prison system as slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution?
Right, well, I think to the extent there is a mass movement exists, in that we've seen a real shift in the national conversation about mass incarceration and about the fact that while incarceration for periods of time may be defensible. Mass incarceration is not. And that mood has certainly shifted. So when people ask me sometimes, am I in despair or pessimistic since the election? Because, of course, CCA or Core Civic, whatever they want to brand themselves, their stocks were down prior to Trump being elected. And, of course, as soon as he got elected, they shot right back up again. No, we are.
In anticipation of what?
That he would, of course, want to increase privatization. So the feds had issued indications that they were going to pull out the private prison business, that there was no indication that they actually saved money, which they don't, which may be another discussion for another show. But also they certainly aren't as safe and aren't as well run. But we're not pessimistic because 85% of prisons are state prisons, not federal. And this is an issue that that criminal justice reform is a really big deal right now across this country because the way things have been occurring since the mid-90s, it doesn't make economic sense. It's not good policy. It doesn't make communities safer. It's not realistic about issues like recidivism. And as we said before, it is destroying communities. And so...
Well, it seems that the only visible thing is that it's making a lot of people a lot of money.
Well, it is making a lot of people a lot of money.
Incarceration. Now, that's a very, very expensive situation, and it brings in a lot of money.
Right.
And they're using just a minimal amount of that money for the upkeep and the running of the prisons.
Right.
Is that?
Well, it's certainly not being spent on food that's edible. It's definitely not being spent on health care. I mean, one of the things we did was we worked to organize a lawsuit concerning hepatitis C, which is being untreated, basically, in Tennessee prisons. When we filed that suit, there were almost 3,500 prisoners that the system knew about who had hepatitis C, and 8 were receiving treatment at the time. I mean, so, I mean, they're certainly not providing for programs to reduce recidivism because, okay, let's say you work at a Core Civic prison. Let's say you work for a private prison. What is your incentive to actually introduce good quality programming? What's your incentive to keep families together? What's your incentive to try to help encourage visitation instead of prohibit visitation? What's your incentive to really want to make sure that person doesn't come back? You don't have any incentive because I promise you, you have shares in the corporation that you work for. I mean, this is common sense.
And the only incentive is to bring more people in, because the more people you bring in and paying them at 13 cents an hour.
Yeah.
$13. I'm leaning toward 13. 13's actually 13 cents an hour. That's no compensation at all.
And the guys are reaching out to get those jobs because it gives you an opportunity to get out of the cell and to be active, you know, to move around and stuff.
Either you become involved in some kind of labor kind of activity, or you sit in your cell all day.
Yeah.
Is that? Are you given that choice?
Pretty much sitting around doing too much of nothing. You know.
Well, you also have the choice to not work. And if you choose not to work, then you're written up for disciplinary, right? And then you go to solitary confinement, which your mental health then begins to deteriorate.
And so you're really forced to, in a real sense, to work in a prison, some kind of employment. Every person in prison has some kind of employment. Is that true?
Well, no, not every person, because there aren't enough jobs. But people would prefer to be active. Right? Anyone who thinks that prisoners have it easy, what is it, 3 hots and a cot, are completely disconnected from the reality of the prison system today.
For sure.
But do we have time? We've got this. We're talking about prison reform. There are a number of very good reform bills, and sponsored by Republicans, not just Democrats, but by Republicans in the Tennessee legislature this session. So there is reason to be optimistic.